He also has extensive experience overseas, but slightly different, committing 42 years of his life to service with the Defence Forces. It's not every Irish officer who's gone head-to-head with presidents, warlords and war criminals in the pursuit of peace, but this man was no ordinary officer. His career included tours of duty with the United Nations in Cyprus, Lebanon, the Middle East, and New York, a bit of glamour at the end. He also served with the EU in the former Yugoslavia and played a significant role in brokering peace there in the 1990s, taking part in negotiations, visiting prisoner of war camps and organising hostage releases. He later testified at the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague as a prosecution witness at the trials of Slobodan Milosevic, the president of Serbia, in 2003, General Strugar of the Federal Army in 2004, the leader of the Bosnian Serbs in 2010, and the commander of the Bosnian Serb Army in 2012. He went on to publish a book of those brutal times and his extraordinary life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 2022 recipient of the UL Alumni Award for Outstanding Humanitarian Contribution, Colonel Colm Doyle. Now for the most challenging part of your career to date, being interviewed on the UL Alumni stage. I don't know where to start. There's so much we could go through there. I suppose you'd say a good point would be to read the book and get a bit more info, but we'll try and give people a synopsis here over the next few minutes. You've had an incredible career. I suppose the main question most of us normal people listening to be thinking, did you ever feel like you were in danger?
Well, I think any time you go abroad as a soldier, you always face a certain degree of uncertainty. And therefore, you can become a little bit complacent. So you need to exercise a great degree of caution. In my case, I was relatively lucky. Probably Bosnia was the exception. Because in Bosnia there was a conflict that was ongoing. And I had been involved in attempting to negotiate the hostage release of the president of Bosnia. He was the leader of the Bosnian Serbs and the SLA party called Ilija Izetbegovic. And during the middle of the hostage exchange, I was pulled aside by a Serb colonel who took out a pistol because the deal went sour. The ambush took place when the federal general was being released, and I found myself being blamed for it. And the colonel, who was talking in front of about 50 Serb troops, they were listening to a car radio of the paramilitaries, and they were getting untruths about what was happening to the convoy. So he took out his pistol and he waved it in my general direction. And I think that was the only time in my career I felt that I might actually be killed.
I don't blame you. I think most of us would concur with you, not to take it lightly, but at least you've survived to tell the tale and tell it with a smile. And, you know, those are days we thought were behind us. But we're back in again now in a war situation on European soil, and we've seen what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. That's just the wrong way to put it. We've seen what Russia are doing to Ukraine. You did help broker peace, though, in the former Yugoslavia. Are we anywhere near that when it comes to Ukraine?
I'm not sure. I'm really not that qualified to be able to pass too much of a comment, but I know I've been making some public comments in the media on the war in Ukraine, and I think whether we like it or not, the fact is that the president of Russia is the commander of his army. He sent that army into Ukraine, an independent and sovereign state. He must be held accountable. Unfortunately for this side of the world, or the West, that man has a button which can start a nuclear war. So there has to be caution exercised by all sides. But I think what he has done, I find it very difficult to understand that this man has held the entire world to ransom for the last 9 months, and there's not too much we can do about it. So I laud the efforts that are being made. I have great, tremendous admiration for the Ukrainian people and for the people of this country who has given safety and succour to those Ukrainians. So I laud all of the efforts that have been made. But certainly it is a conflict which has the world in a very, very dangerous place. And if I knew what the outcome was going to be, I might make a few shillings, but I just don't know.
One thing we do know is that eventually, thankfully in the modern world we live in, people do seem to be taken into account eventually. But how difficult was it for you then when you were a witness at war crimes in The Hague? This is stuff that most of us would just see on TV far, far away. You'd never think that somebody from our little country would have such a pivotal role.
I think for my role, I had a very good set of notes, ceasefire agreements, videos, and I always felt that when I went to Bosnia, one of the missions we had, we were there as monitors or an observer. And the job of an observer is simply to look at and report. And I remember meeting with Lord Carrington, and he came to Sarajevo, and I was with him in a car going to the airport. And he had spent 3 days talking to Serbs, Croats and Muslims in the city of Sarajevo. And he turned round to me and he said, "Do you know what's happening here?" And I gave him an off-the-cuff record of what I felt was happening. I was head of the mission at the time. And he got out of the car before he got in the plane, and he said, "I've learned more from you in the last 15 minutes than I have in the last 3 days. It is vital," he said, "for Europe that we have military people on the ground who knows what is happening and who can give a truthful account of what it is." So that was my role inside when I was working. When I went to the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague, I made what's known as a witness statement, which was simply an account of who I met, where I was, what I did, and I had the evidence to back it up. And my job was to tell the truth as I saw it. So there was nothing glorified, there was nothing exaggerated, and I made that a point of when I was writing the memoir. And by the way, there is not one for everybody in the audience.
Oh, really?
But so I felt that now when I came to testify at the Karadzic trial, I was told by him beforehand that he was been given 15 hours to cross-examine me. Now 15 hours in tribunal time is 3 days, and it was an extreme test of my memory. But thankfully I got through it, and I think he has now suffering what he deserves, which is life imprisonment.
I think that's 3 days well spent. I was very lucky a few years ago when I worked in RTE. I was sent out to visit the Irish Army just to bring some reports on. So I got to see the work Ireland did with the United Nations in Lebanon and also in the Golan Heights. And until I went out, I have to say, I was quite ignorant. I didn't really understand what high an esteem the Irish Army is held in overseas. Why do you think that is?
We're at it a long time. The first Irish troops to go abroad was in 1958. We're one of the few countries that since that year, there never has been a day passed that we haven't got military personnel serving throughout the world. I think we have service now in over 60 countries. We have been participating in 12 separate United Nations missions with troops. That means hundreds of troops. We are close on, I think, 75,000 tours of duty with the United Nations over 60 years. Currently, we have 550 people serving in a lot of missions. And I think in receiving this accolade tonight, I think I would like to do it on behalf of members of the Irish Defence Forces, of which we've lost 89 on service in international peacekeeping.
It deserves a round of applause, I think. Now, one final question. It might be the toughest one I've thrown at you. You were so busy. You had such a wide and varied and important career. You retired at what would be seen as a young age, which is 60. But, jeepers, that must have been some adjustment. How did you cope with coming back to normal life?
It takes a while to get used to retirement. I had commuted for 12 of the last 14 years of my career. So I wasn't going to come home to my good wife, Grania, and say, "What are we doing tomorrow?" Because she would say, "Well, I don't know what you're doing, but this is what I'm doing." So we came up with the idea that we would convert the attic. So we converted the attic, and that's now known as my man shed. So I can retreat to the man shed, and it's up there where I compiled this memoir, which is called Witness to War Crimes, which was published in 2018. So that was the first thing. Then I got involved a little bit in the community. So for 10 years, I was on the board of management of John F. Kennedy School on the Ennis Road. I'm also a community first responder. And also I I've maintained an interest in international affairs, so periodically I'm asked by the media to do an interview. I've been doing it recently on Ukraine. And finally then I have 4 children, 2 males and 2 females, and you get the phone call, and I warn you all of it. It's something like, "Hello, Dad. Tell me, are you busy?" And that means not just would I cut their grass, it means it could be painting the entire house. And then with 6 grandchildren, I'm actually busy enough.
Well, I think you've set a very, very high bar for the productivity out of various man caves and man sheds around the country. There are men here shuddering, thinking what jobs they're going to be given over the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Agus cahortachas, gura míle míle mágat.